I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington, and this week on Face the Nation, shocking news out of the Middle East as Israel recovers the bodies of 6 hostages, including 1 American. Anger and grief from hostage families as Israel confirms the discovery of the bodies in a tunnel in Gaza. New outrage in Israel aimed at the country's prime minister and new political pressure here at home. What will all of this mean for efforts to secure an elusive ceasefire? We'll hear from the father of one of the hostages still held in Gaza. And back in the U.S., Labor Day campaign kickoff. Both sides embark on a battleground blitz, talking reproductive rights, the border, and the economy.
And unlike Donald Trump, I will always put the middle class and working class families first. I come from the middle class. I know what I'm talking about.
We have illegal immigrants coming into our country, living in luxury hotels above where the veterans are. It's so reverse of what it should be.
One big union still hasn't endorsed either candidate, the Brotherhood of Teamsters. Their president, Shan OBrien, spoke at the Republican convention. What are he and his members thinking now? Then we'll get a report on the impact of the Biden administration's asylum restrictions at the border. Texas Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez will join us. Democratic Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey will also join us. And finally, with early voting in some states about to get underway, we'll check in with CBS election law contributor David Becker. It's all just ahead on Face the Nation. Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. Margaret is off today. We begin this morning with new details from the Middle East, where the Israeli military says the bodies of the hostages in Gaza were found in a tunnel. One of the hostages was Hersh Goldberg Polin, a 23-year-old American Israeli who was abducted from a music festival, one of 250 hostages taken captive on October 7th of last year. In a statement last night, President Biden said he was, quote, devastated and outraged, and recalled that Hersh had lost his arm helping friends and strangers during the attack. Imtiaz Tayeb is in Tel Aviv this morning with the latest.
His name is Hersh.
The parents of Hersh Goldberg Polin worked tirelessly to keep Israel's hostage crisis on the global stage. Even addressing last month's Democratic Party convention.
Hersh, if you can hear us, we love you. Stay strong. Survive.
Following the announcement, the 23-year-old Israeli American's remains had been recovered from a tunnel in southern Gaza, his family released a statement saying, with broken hearts, the Goldberg Polin family is devastated to announce the death of their beloved son and brother, Hersh. The bodies of 5 other hostages have also been recovered. Carmel Gat, Eden Yerushalami, Alexander Lobanov, Almog Sarusi, and Master Sergeant Ori Danino. According to the Israeli media, preliminary autopsy reports have found all 6 were shot in the head. The Israeli military has said Hamas was responsible for their brutal murders, and also said the remains were discovered not far from where another hostage, Farhan al-Qadi, was found alive just last week. The news of the killings has triggered grief and anger across Israel, with many Israelis blaming the deaths on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for, in their words, sabotaging the hostage release and ceasefire deal with Hamas that's been under negotiation for months.
All they care about is the politics, and they didn't approve to do a deal with Hamas, and so our loved ones are still there, and currently we don't see the horizon and don't know when they will be back with us.
In a taped address, Netanyahu said the Israeli government is committed to continue striving for a deal that will return all of the hostages. While President Biden told reporters it was time to end the war on Gaza.
I think we're on the verge of having an agreement. It's just time to end it. It's time to finish it.
But until an agreement is reached, the violence rages on, even as the UN attempts to vaccinate 640,000 Palestinian children to prevent a major outbreak of polio in Gaza. And based on the framework of a deal Israel and Hamas have already agreed to, 3 of the 6 hostages who were killed would have been released as part of what's called the humanitarian category during the first phase of an eventual ceasefire agreement, Nancy. And Hirsch Goldberg Poland would have been one of them.
So close to freedom. Imtiaz Tayeb reporting in Tel Aviv. Thank you. We are joined now by Jonathan Dekel-Chen, the father of one of the Israeli-American hostages still being held by Hamas. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us. I can only imagine what a difficult night it has been for your family, for all of the families of the hostages. Have you been able to connect with the Goldberg Polands or any of the families who lost their loved ones?
Sorry about that. Yes, I have corresponded with them over the course of the last few hours, expressing condolences. We are all absolutely horrified by the needless, senseless death of these 6 beautiful young people.
What, if anything, have you been told by the Israeli government about how these 6 individuals died and when they died? Hamas is saying that they were killed by Israeli bullets. Do you believe that?
Yes, we we know what we know from the media, actually, and from some statements from our military. They died very shortly before they were found by IDF troops. All of them were certainly living in a state of deprivation for many, many months. But in the end, as your reporter said, they were executed by Hamas. And the same is true, evidently, of 6 other bodies of Israeli hostages who were returned the week before, 4 of them from my kibbutz. Those were older men, in this case this week, younger people, but all of them alive. For months in Hamas captivity. So time is absolutely working against us, and quite honestly, against the people of Gaza as well.
Well, you heard Imtiaz report that several of the hostages who were killed were next in line to be released if there were to be a ceasefire. Who do you hold responsible for the fact that there is still no ceasefire today?
Well, the situation exists because Hamas on October 7th invaded Israel, killed nearly 1,400 people, committed mass rape, mass looting, destroyed homes and property, and has refused since October 7th to return all of the hostages. Now, that being said, given that we're dealing with Satan, I mean, that's sort of the launching point for any discussion. Israelis at large, and myself included, have been extremely critical of the Israeli government for not negotiating in good faith now for many, many months. There is no explanation, a reasonable explanation, why our government is refusing to deeply engage in these negotiations and complete them when our entire senior military establishment and intelligence community has been saying publicly and openly for weeks and months that the time has come to end the fighting in Gaza, get our hostages home, as many alive as possible. We know that many dozens of the 101 remaining hostages have already been murdered, and to end the madness in Gaza. It's simply the government that is preventing it.
You are originally from Connecticut. Your son, Sagi, is the father of 3 young girls, one of whom was born while he was in captivity. He's among 38 hostages taken from your kibbutz. What, if anything, do you know about where he is being held and what condition he is in?
Well, one small correction. On October 7th, 79 people were taken from our kibbutz and 51 slaughtered. There are 29 remaining from my kibbutz. We know that, well, he's 36 years old, father of 3 little girls. His 7-month pregnant wife miraculously survived with their 2 little girls on October 7th. The only thing that we know for sure about Sagi is that as of late November, early December, we know that he was alive, wounded but alive, and we know that because in the first hostage exchange, 40 of the 100 women and children who were released by Hamas in that first negotiation were from our kibbutz, and a handful of them had seen Sagi and other men mostly in the tunnels and could tell us that he was still alive.
Israel's opposition leader is now calling the Netanyahu government a death cabinet. He's calling for labor strikes against Netanyahu. Do you share that anger? You said that Netanyahu has not engaged seriously. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't think it's just my opinion alone. I think the vast majority of Israelis now have come to believe by his actions, not his words, but by his actions, that he's been driven primarily by a desire to retain power with a narrow, very radical messianic coalition in the Israeli government. And he has made choices to pursue this fantasy of total victory over Hamas, a terrorist organization, no doubt. But this idea of total victory is a messianic one from his coalition partners and not realistic. And he's preferred that, at least to date, over the well-being of all the hostages. There are 7 Americans still remaining in Hamas captivity amongst the 101.
CBS News has confirmed that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is going to meet virtually today with you and the other families of American hostages. Do you believe that the U.S. government has done everything it can to bring these hostages home?
Well, I think the U.S. government itself would say that they would have done enough when all the hostages are home, all of the 101. They say that in our meetings. I can absolutely state that since a couple of days after October 7th, the U.S. administration from top to bottom has been extraordinarily supportive of the hostage families, inclusive, sensitive, empathetic. I believe that they have done everything in their power up to now, but at the end of the day, 2 men have to say yes. One is Yahya Sinwar in a tunnel under Gaza somewhere with the blood of thousands on his hands, Israelis and Palestinians, and Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. President Biden, I believe, has done everything that he can. We need some more, but time is certainly against us. There's no question of that.
Well, we are hoping that you get more, and we appreciate you sharing your story with us today. Jonathan Dekel-Chen, thank you so much. And Face the Nation will be back in 1 minute. Stay with us. We're joined now by Massachusetts Democratic Governor Maura Healey, who is joining us from Boston this morning. Governor Healey, welcome to Face the Nation. So good to have you. You know, there has been an assumption by many progressives when it comes to Israel that Vice President Harris is more sympathetic towards the Palestinian cause than President Biden is. But when she was interviewed this week, she said that actually she is in lockstep with President Biden. She wouldn't do anything differently. You are the governor of a state with a lot of colleges and universities. You know how young people in particular feel about this issue. Does she need to say more?
I think what she has said is exactly right. Her statement last night, this morning, and what she said last week at the convention. I mean, she's been very clear about the need for America to continue to stand by Israel, for the hostages to come home, for there to be a ceasefire and a peaceful resolution here. And I think the way she has articulated this has been both with compassion and also with a very clear understanding about what needs to happen.
You signed a big maternal health bill in your state last week. It would expand insurance coverage for pregnant women, for women who are struggling with postpartum depression. President Trump announced this week that he wants to require insurance companies to cover IVF treatments. Is that something that you and parents in your states would welcome?
Well, first of all, don't believe anything that Donald Trump says. You know, as Attorney General, I had to sue him over 100 times for his lies. And as governor, I've seen the very real difference between a Trump administration and an administration that we'll have with Kamala Harris. When it comes to health, women's health, reproductive freedom, there can be no clear a difference in this election. Kamala Harris stands squarely for reproductive freedom. She supports women's access to health care. She knows the importance of giving women the freedom and the resources to protect care. Donald Trump, remember, is the architect of the undoing of Roe. He has said just the other day he's going to support the draconian abortion ban in Florida, the 6-week abortion ban. So, you know, I don't think Donald Trump can spell IVF, let alone understand what it means, because his own Project 2025, remember, which establishes a fetal personhood, would undermine and take away IVF treatment. In addition, Donald Trump is the person who tried to undo the Affordable Care Act time and time again. So don't believe Donald Trump when it comes to women's health, women's reproductive freedom, and Americans' access to health care. He doesn't believe in or support any of it. Kamala Harris does. She'll fight for it. She'll protect it.
But were you surprised to hear a Republican embracing what sounds like an insurance coverage mandate? Do you see that as a step in the right direction?
You can't take this seriously. I mean, this isn't just a Republican. This is, and by the way, I work well with Republicans. This is Donald Trump, who will say anything and everything depending on where the wind is blowing. He caught some heat the other day, you know, and so he comes out with this statement that all of a sudden he's a believer in IVF. It's just patently false. It's offensive. And I think, you know, what's important is that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are out there day after day on offense. I mean, they're touching rural areas, they're in red counties, they're in red states, they're all over. And they're not just talking to Democrats, Nancy. They're talking to Republicans, to independents, and to so many Americans who are just tuning in this Labor Day and haven't made up their mind about who they're going to vote for. And on issue after issue, protecting the middle class, a well-functioning economy, standing up for reproductive freedom, these are all things that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz believe in and will fight for, and things that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance don't know the first thing about and cannot deliver on.
I want to turn to immigration, because last year you blamed a, quote, federal crisis of inaction for the large numbers of undocumented migrants who were ending up in your state and other states. You even declared a state of emergency. Border crossings have come down pretty significantly over the past couple of months after the administration's asylum restrictions went into effect. Is your state still at capacity or over capacity, or has the situation improved?
You know, I'm glad you point that out, Nancy, because border crossings are actually below 2019 levels. Border crossings have come down as a result of President Biden's executive action. What I have said and experienced as a governor in Massachusetts, and I talked to colleagues around the country, this is the problem of Congress. Now, remember, months ago, we actually had a bipartisan deal on the table, negotiated by Democrats and Republicans. It would have solved the border crisis. It would have put more agents down there. And as a former attorney general, I know the importance of securing the border, as does Kamala Harris. She's been very, very clear about that, to stop the trafficking of drugs and guns and human beings, okay? Remember what happened? Donald Trump killed that deal and said he did not want a deal on the border. So the fault is Donald Trump right now when it comes to the border and what has happened. And the one thing that Kamala Harris was clear about last week, among other things, is that she would not only push for bringing back that bipartisan bill, she would fight for it and she would sign it into law as president. That's what states like Massachusetts need.
But if you think that this policy is working, do you wish that the administration would have put it into effect a lot sooner, back when you and other Democratic governors first started sounding the alarm bells?
No, I think the administration has handled this as best it could. Remember, you know, it's Congress that needs to act and has needed to act on this, both to give us the resources, the funding, and for our states who are dealing with this, but also for agents down on the border to stop the flow of fentanyl, to stop unlawful immigration into America. So really, the fault is with Congress, and you know, unfortunately, Congress didn't act, and they didn't act because too many Republicans were kowtowing to Donald Trump. And, you know, that's why President Biden took the action that he did. I'm glad. And, you know, I know it's so important in this election to elect Kamala Harris so we can deal with the border once and for all.
Governor Healey, one more quick question before I let you go. You're the former state attorney general, and your name has been floated as a possible U.S. attorney general if Vice President Harris is elected. Is that a job that you'd be interested in?
I love being governor of this state. I love what we've been able to do, free community college, better access to health care, making sure that we do things to move forward economically. I'm a pro-growth Democrat, as is Kamala Harris. We just cut taxes here in the state, which is also something that Kamala Harris wants to do, cut taxes for the middle class. Donald Trump only wants to raise taxes for the ultra wealthy. So I'm focused, Nancy, on doing everything I can to elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in November. It will be good, not just for Massachusetts, it will be good for America.
Governor Maura Healey of Massachusetts, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it. And we'll be right back.
This portion of Face the Nation is brought to you by Simply Safe. There's no safe like Simply Safe.
We turn now to Shan OBrien. He is the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, one of the nation's largest labor unions, and he joins us this morning from Boston. President OBrien, thank you so much for being with us on this Labor Day weekend. I want to start out by asking you about endorsements. You lead one of the 10 largest unions in the country, and I want to put this graphic up. Take a look. The other 9 have all issued their endorsements for President of the United States. They've all endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate Tim Walz. It is now September 1st. Where has summer gone? When do the Teamsters plan to announce who they are endorsing?
Well, I think historically the Teamsters have always endorsed after both respective conventions. This is a little different this time under our leadership. We've brought every single candidate to the table in front of our rank and file members and our general executive board, and we're waiting on Vice President Harris to commit to come meet with us.
And I believe her campaign says they are working with you to figure out a date for that. You know, her policies are more or less in line with the current president, who you did sit down with when you thought that he was going to be the nominee, when we all thought he was going to be the nominee. Are there any concerns that you have about Harris possibly being less pro-labor, less pro-union than the current president?
So our union is a lot different than most unions. We represent 1.3 million members. Half of our members are Republicans, half of our members are Democrats. So we have to serve all of our membership equally. Look, everybody has a different style of leadership. We want the opportunity to sit down with Vice President Harris. I mean, I said to someone the other day, you don't hire someone unless you give them an interview. And, you know, this is our opportunity to ask her about Teamster-specific issues and also labor issues. So until we have that meeting, you know, obviously we will wait to make that determination.
Very quickly, you didn't endorse anyone back in 1996. Is there a possibility that could happen again?
Look, we want to make sure we make the best decision and endorse the best candidate for labor. You know, 1996 was a long time ago. It's all going to be driven by our rank and file members and our leadership. We're a very, very democratic union.
Got it. Shan OBrien, stay with us. We're going to have more questions for you after the break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation now with Teamsters President Shan OBrien. Mr. OBrien, thanks so much for sticking with us. One of your fellow unions, the United Auto Workers, filed federal labor charges against the Republican nominee Donald Trump after he seemed to celebrate the notion of firing workers who go on strike. That happened in a conversation that he was having with Elon Musk. Are you with the UAW on this? Do you support the action they took?
Look, I support anybody that attacks labor. They should be held accountable, and any organization that's going to hold them accountable. I can't speak for the UAW, but if you recall when those remarks were made by former President Trump, I was the first union to call them out, call the administration out, and call, quite frankly, Elon Musk out. I've been fighting corporate billionaires and greed for the last 2.5 years, and you know, the UAW feels they have a right to file an NLRB charge, so that's their right. I've got a right to call out former President Trump or anybody else that attacks labor.
Yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, you called it economic terrorism. How did it go over with your members? Lo
Look, our members love the fact that they have a voice, that they have the ability to stand up and fight corporate America. It's been a long time coming. Over the last 2.5 years, the Teamsters Union has had 226 strikes. We've grown more than we ever have, so there is a great appetite for the fight with our rank and file members, and our rank and file members enable us to fight for them day in and day out.
That's a perfect segue into my next question, which is about union membership in this country. It is Labor Day weekend, after all. So let's take a look at the state of union labor in this country. About 10% of the U.S. workforce are union members, down from about 20% in 1983. A majority of Americans say that's bad. That decline is bad for working people. Is the decline irreversible in your view?
The decline is definitely irreversible. Now, let's look back, to 1983. That's when a bipartisan congressional bill was passed, trucking deregulation, and we lost 400,000 members. A lot of companies went bankrupt. So, although there's a lot of politicians taking credit for the labor movement over the last couple of years, they're the same politicians that caused this problem that we face today. But to answer your question, I think we are definitely on the upswing. We have proved how valuable the American worker is to this country, especially through one of the biggest crises we faced was a pandemic, and that has obviously incentivized workers to form unions, and we've got to work collaboratively with both sides to make sure that people will be able to organize without retribution or retaliation moving forward, and that's up to politicians, whether you're an R or a D or an I.
You shared that message at the Republican convention, a move that some members of Teamsters leadership did not approve of. They were pretty vocal about that. It appears that it also cost you a speaking slot at the Democratic convention. Did the Democrats ever tell you why they didn't give you a chance to speak?
No, they didn't. And look, I'm going to say this. Whatever the critics out there, and they're very few in the leadership, whenever I get an opportunity to highlight the American worker, especially the Teamster worker, I'm going to take any and all venue. We asked both conventions respectively at the same time, and the Republican National Convention immediately responded to us, didn't try and edit any of our messages, and I was hopeful that the Democrats would do the same, but they didn't. I'm not upset about it, but I can tell you this, my rank and file members who have been lifelong Democrats are not happy about it.
Yeah, I know there were some members of the union who spoke, but that's not the same as having the leader of the organization speak. Very quickly, did you choose to speak at the Republican convention, which is a pretty unusual move for a union leader, because you feel that Trump has been more pro-labor than past Republican nominees?
No, not at all. I spoke there because it was the ability to highlight how important we are. It was the ability to call out the people, the corporate elitists, who forget who built this country, the American workers. People like to, have their own opinions on why we were there, but I was there to talk about the American workers. It wasn't an endorsement for any and all Republicans. It was strictly a message about how important and how valuable we are, and to let the people know that fight us every day, that we're not going away.
Understood. Shan OBrien, president of the Teamsters, thanks so much, and we'll be looking forward to hearing who your union eventually endorses. Thanks for being here. And we'll be right back. Former President Trump has promised to launch the largest deportation operation in American history, and he has blamed the Biden administration for a historic number of illegal border crossings in recent years. But those crossings have fallen sharply since the Biden administration implemented new asylum restrictions in June. CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya Gonzalez has more.
Hoy te deportaron de los Estados Unidos. You were deported from the U.S. today.
Sí,
this morning.
Hoy en la mañana.
In the morning. How are you feeling now? ¿Cómo te sientes ahora?
Pues estoy desesperado porque no sé qué voy a hacer.
You don't know what you're going to do. We found that desperation is all too familiar in this border town, where scores of migrants are routinely turned away by the U.S. We're in Nogales, Mexico. As you can see, the U.S. is just a few yards away in that direction. But for many of the migrants here behind me, it is now completely out of reach. They were deported just this morning from the U.S. under President Biden's executive order on asylum. That order has shut down asylum processing between legal entry points at the U.S.-Mexico border, allowing officials to ramp up deportations of migrants crossing illegally. And so you see dozens of people Families with children deported every morning.
Every morning. It's 24/7.
Dora Rodriguez crossed the U.S. border herself in the 1980s to escape the civil war in El Salvador. She comes to Nogales every week with other American volunteers to offer food and guidance to deportees in need.
You know, they don't even know where they're at.
They don't know where they are.
They don't even know where they are.
Or what to do.
Right. So we encourage them to go to the shelters, local shelters in this area, to get a bath, to take a good meal.
The Biden administration says the new measures are partly why illegal border crossings have hit a 4-year low. But according to Rodriguez, those policies mean people fleeing danger are being turned away.
They're fleeing violence from organized crimes, from gangs, hunger. So they're no criminals, you know, and they are yet punished by our laws. These people is traumatized for a lifetime.
You wanted to protect your daughters. Querías proteger a tus hijas. Rosales and her daughters had been deported that morning. She says her family fled their hometown in Mexico after a man started harassing her daughters.
Quería darle la explicación para mis hijos.
You wanted to explain to U.S. officials why you came, pero no te dieron esa oportunidad.
No,
you did not get that chance.
Nada.
Are you planning to potentially enter the U.S. again?
Sí.
Yes.
Por mis hijas.
Because of your daughters.
Por mis hijas. Arriesga uno por su
Pero
familia todo.
te pueden deportar otra vez. They can deport you again.
Lo sé.
You know that.
Lo sé. Pero hay veces que hay que arriesgar todo.
You're willing to take that risk. A risk many will still take, despite harsher U.S. policies. Camilo Montoya, CBS News, Nogales, Mexico.
We are joined now by Texas Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us here in Washington. You represent a border district. You heard what Camilo just reported, and let's put some numbers up on the screen so people really know what we're talking about. All year long, the number of migrant encounters along the southern border was hovering a little below 200,000 a month. Then this executive order went into place in early June, and those numbers plunged to 100,000 in July. They were cut in half. Are you ready to call this move a success?
Nancy, it's great to be here. You know, I represent nearly half of the overall southern border. I literally was on the border on Friday. What I can tell you is things are getting worse. And let me give you an example. So in the New Mexico area, to date, there's been 100 illegal immigrants that have perished, okay? Every part of the border is different. Parts of my district, it takes you 3 days humping through the desert in order to make it to the border. In the New Mexico area, it takes you 1 hour. So how is 100 people dying in 1 hour? The reason is these criminal organizations are holding these migrants in these stash houses for sometimes over a month, feeding them one meal and one bottle of water a day. So when it is time for them to finally make that trek, they give them caffeine pills and they try to rush them over. So in many cases, the humanitarian crisis along the border is getting worse. The other piece of it, too, in El Paso, one of the safest countries in America, the FBI just conducted an operation this week, and they scooped up dozens of these criminal gangs, via the anti-gang task force. So in many cases, Americans are less safe because of this, and migrants are less safe for this. I've been of the advocate, this is how you solve it. If somebody comes over illegally, they immediately get deported. You also double down on legal immigration. If we want to win the space race, we're going to need engineers from all over the world. If we're going to grow our economy, we're going to need the hospitality industry, construction workers, and other areas. You double down on work visas. You vet people, and you double down on that. We're not seeing any of that.
So you've been pushing for the administration to take executive action for years. They've now done it, and you're saying you're not happy about it, even though the numbers have come down so sharply?
Well, ask the 100 families that died. This is a part of the ugly part of it is so many people are dying, and those are the people that are dying. What about the people that are getting assaulted and other areas? It's getting worse. So people are looking at the numbers and thinking, oh, it's getting better. I look at it, who is coming over and what is happening to these people. In many cases, these criminal organizations, these Tran de Agua, TDA, they're growing in prominence. These Venezuelan gangs, they're all over the country, and they're seeping their tentacles into our society. We have to get ahead of this, and we need real solutions. Right. That real solution is holding these people accountable, deporting people that aren't here, and double down on legal work visas, people doing it the right way.
Right, so there are bipartisan proposals to deal with these very complicated problems you're describing. One of them was struck in the Senate, but former President Trump scuttled that deal, as you know. Do you wish that he would have allowed that to go forward?
There were some positive things out of that, the border package that the Senate was working on, but there were some very negative things. I wouldn't have voted for that. The reason I wouldn't vote for it, because it allowed 5,000 people to break the law before you enact it. The number should always be zero. We can both be firm on illegal immigration, and there was no talk of legal immigration. What about rewarding those that are doing it the right way? What about our allies in Afghanistan that we've left behind? There's some things that could have been done. It was a failed bill. There's thousands of these bills. That was a failed bill before it even gets going. I'm looking for serious partners.
There's a bipartisan bill in the House. Do you support that?
Which bill? I mean, the bill that I look at it through the lens is...
I'm talking about Congresswoman Escobar's bill.
Oh, that has no chance of going anywhere. You know why? Because it's 500 pages long. So that gives you any one person to say, I don't like this bill. The other piece of it, too, is it talks about allowing people that are here illegally pathway to citizenship. That is dead on arrival. You don't even want to go there. You have to start with securing the border and work visas, people that are vetted here to come. You want to talk about pathway to citizenship? That's code for you really do not want to solve the problem.
Okay, but you say you want to solve the problem, and yet you don't like any of the bipartisan proposals out there. Are you writing your own?
I do, yeah. I have a bill. It's actually 3 pages long. And what it does is it extends work visas from 1 year to 3 years, and it allows people to streamline the process. Instead of mailing in work visas, you do it online like everyone else. And there's also a border security piece to it, too. So you can do both. We can both be warm and welcoming, and we can both secure the border. All the proposals right now have no chance of it. And here's another thing. Has Tim Walz ever been to the border? When was the last time he's been to the border? So you have to see it to hear these stories about the 100 migrants that have died in New Mexico. You have to see it firsthand.
You served in the Navy for 20 years. As a veteran, I want to get your take on what happened this week at Arlington National Cemetery. The Secretary of the Army felt that she had to put out a statement saying that an ANC employee, an Arlington National Cemetery employee who attempted to ensure adherence to the rules was abruptly pushed aside when the Trump campaign tried to bring a campaign photographer onto the grounds with the former president. And then a top Trump advisor posted even after that, I'm reposting this to hope to trigger the hacks at the Secretary of Army's office. Have you ever seen a campaign talk this way about the military?
You know, the funny thing about President Trump is he gets all the attention, and no matter what he does, sometimes that gets spun this way or the other. I can tell you that veterans...
That's not spin. That's his own campaign staff.
Well, I can tell you veterans support Trump far and away. And the fact that he was there to highlight that the 13 Americans that were killed at Abbey Gate, I think that's something that's overlooked. Once again, I served in Afghanistan. Unlike Tim Walz, who did not serve in Afghanistan, I've been there. I retired as an E9. Unlike Tim Walz, who retired as an E8, it's important for us to show up at the same
I'm just
breath.
curious, when you compare your service to Tim Walz, are you saying that he's somehow less of a veteran?
I'm saying he lied about what pay grade he retired at. And I'm saying I'm not lying about the pay grade I retired at. I'm also saying it's important that Arlington is a very special place.
It is.
We have to make sure it's a special place. And we have to keep politics out of it. And I think it's important that we do that. And so, I wish both President Trump and, President Biden were there highlighting the fact of these Gold Star families. This is what we need to get back to. It's so much finger pointing. I get it. It's towards the tail end of the election. But we have to get back to putting veterans first, putting our families first, and putting the American people above everything else.
Congressman Tony Gonzales of Texas, thank you so much for being here with us this morning. I appreciate
Nancy.
it. And we'll be back in a moment. Stick with us. Election Day is still more than 2 months away, but voters in dozens of states won't have to wait for November to cast a ballot. 36 states plus the District of Columbia allow voters to cast early ballots by mail without providing an excuse. And in 47 states plus D.C., voters have the option to vote early either by mail or in person. Joining us with a look at our election system is David Becker. He's a former civil rights attorney at the Department of Justice who now leads the Center of Election Innovation and Research. He's also a contributor here at CBS. David, it is so good to see you. It is Labor Day weekend, so it's the traditional kickoff of the election season. Amazing to think that voters in North Carolina are going to start getting their mail-in ballots as soon as this week. Give us a lay of the land. Is it going to be easier or harder for voters to cast their ballots in 2024 than it was in 2020?
Well, there's a lot of political rhetoric out there about overemphasizing fraud or overemphasizing voter suppression, and there have been some bad laws passed in some states. For instance, those voters in North Carolina will now have to provide some additional identification when they vote by mail. But overall, if we look at the history of the United States, it is easier to vote than ever before in American history. And 99.9% of voters, when they go to try to vote, they're going to find it's an easy, convenient experience. If they choose to vote in person, they're going to be around their neighbors and members of their community. They're going to wait in line less than 30 minutes. That's the normal voting experience in the United States. It is easier to register to vote than ever before. More voters have access to online voter registration now, 40 states or more. More voters are automatically registered at the Motor Vehicles Agency, things like that. And then you can check your registration easier than ever before online, right there on the state's website in almost every state. And same with voting. As you showed, early voting is available in almost every single state. Mail voting without an excuse is available in the vast majority of states. So voters are going to have a choice and be able to vote very conveniently.
What should people know about registering to vote if they haven't gotten around to it yet?
So there's still plenty of time. That's the good news. Every single state allows registration to vote for November up to 30 days before the election. So you'll have until early October to register. If you haven't registered yet, do it today. It's a great time. Go online. Go to vote.gov. That's a great site to find information from your state. What you'll do is there's a drawdown menu there, and you put in your state, and you'll find out information, and it'll take you to the official state source, which is the place you should always go to check your registration or register to vote. Some states allow registration through October and even on Election Day itself. But every single state, every single eligible voter in the United States can register to vote up until early October.
David, you've been really proactive. I see you online, pushing back when you encounter really serious election misinformation, particularly when it comes from someone like Elon Musk, who owns a social media platform and has been pushing some really inflammatory claims when it comes to voting.
Yeah, there are very powerful forces that want us as Americans who live in our democratic society to doubt that democratic society, to doubt our elections that decide our leaders, and to hate our neighbors, to think of our neighbors as enemies if they happen to disagree with us politically. And the fact is that our elections are as secure as they've ever been. We have more paper ballots now than ever before. Those paper ballots are auditable and recountable, and we do audit them to make sure that the machines counted them accurately. We have more accurate voter lists than ever before, thanks to better technology and data that allows states to share data between states and within a state to make sure that we keep up with people as they move so that we have the right address for them. We have more pre-election litigation than ever before. Some people think that's a bad thing. I happen to think it's a good thing. It clarifies those rules. When we get to Election Day, both sides, all the candidates know those rules. Those are the rules we're playing under. You might not like them, but those are the rules, and you can't complain about them once Election Day comes. And then we have had more post-election litigation that has confirmed and verified the results than ever before. We sit here 46 months after the last presidential election right now, an election that has withstood more scrutiny than any election in world history. More scrutiny than any election in world history. And there is still not a single shred of evidence that's been presented to any court. It's been presented on social media. It's easy to put anything up on social media. But to present it to a court, subject it to scrutiny and cross-examination, have a judge hear it and rule, there has not been a single shred of evidence presented in any court in the country.
But are we seeing even more misinformation this election season than we've seen in the past, and where's it coming from?
Yeah, we're seeing more election disinformation for sure. It's coming from Donald Trump. It's coming from Elon Musk. It's coming from, we know, foreign adversaries like Russia and Iran and North Korea and China, who are heavily invested in not only perhaps electing a particular candidate, but in also all of them are heavily invested in getting us to doubt that the accurate candidate was elected, to doubt that our democracy and our elections are working. And so when you see information on social media in particular that triggers something within you, that seems to make you angry about the other side, all of us as sophisticated media consumers should pause and say, maybe that anger is the product they're trying to create. Maybe they're getting paid or they're benefiting from creating that anger in us. And instead go to the trusted sources, our election officials, Republicans, Democrats all across the country. There are hundreds of thousands of them. Our election is going to be run by them, these professionals, and we're going to rely upon about 1 million volunteers, people in our communities and our neighborhoods who are going to volunteer their time for a long day on election day to make sure that our elections are accurate. And if anyone has any doubts about the system, volunteer to join them. Volunteer to be a poll worker, go onto your local county or local election site. It's usually very easy to volunteer. They're looking for people, and you'll see firsthand all of the checks and balances and redundancies that prevent widespread fraud.
Great advice. David Becker, election law expert for CBS News. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. And we'll be right back. The next presidential debate will be on Tuesday, September 10th, and we will have complete coverage with a preview special at 8 p.m. Eastern here on CBS. The live simulcast will be at 9 p.m., followed by expert analysis. That's it for us today. Thanks for watching. For Face the Nation, I'm Nancy Cordes. Have a great holiday.